All right, y'all. It's the second part of the notes. I completely skipped over a part. Um, on Wednesday we didn't go over it, and I was looking through the study guide and realizing we didn't go over it. So I'm gonna go through that part and then go through another part to help you with your notes. Now remember, at any time you can go to AS website. You should be able to log in. You can get, go through the slides and get the notes yourself. If you want to go ahead and fill out the study guide, I have no problem with that. All right, so our objectives for this part is to describe and use the sender-receiver communication model, employ active listening skills, and recognize other effective communication skills.
Communication process.
All right, so communication is a process. The sender-receiver model is a way to break down the process into steps. This model can be used together with active listening skills to create effective communication. All right, so the sender-receiver model includes a sender, receiver, and a message. Other elements include frame of reference and feedback. The sender is a person who encodes or gives information. The receiver is a person who decodes or accepts the information. The message is the information that is being communicated. In a working model, the sender gives a message. The receiver accepts the message and decodes the message based on his or her frame of reference or experience and values. The receiver gives a response called feedback. The sender then interprets the feedback based on his or her own frame of reference. This conforms to the sender whether or not the original message was received properly. All right, so what you need to know from this slide is, what does a receiver do to decode a message? They apply their own frame of reference, which is right here. So what does a receiver do to decode a message? They apply their own frame of reference. So that's what you need to write down from this slide. What does a receiver do to decode a message? They apply their own frame of reference.
Case study.
All right, so you got Tara and Keisha, they're sisters. They're discussing their chores. Tara is scheduled to set the table for dinner every night that week, while Keisha is scheduled to clear the table during the week. Tara would like to trade chores with Keisha. Tara says, Keisha, did you see our chores for this week? Keisha said, yes, I did. Tara, would you be willing to trade chores with me? I want to volunteer at the animal shelter this week after school. If I do, I won't get home in time to set the table for dinner. Keisha says, so I would set the table this week and you would clear it. Tara said, yes, would that be okay with you? Keisha says, okay, that will be all right. And then Tara says, thanks. In the case study, who is the sender?
Case study. Tara.
All right, Tara is the sender. So who is the receiver? The receiver would be Keisha. Which quote is an example of feedback? So I would set the table this week and you would clear it. That's feedback. Which quote is an example of the message? Would you be willing to trade chores with me? That's an example of the message. All right, this is just the sender-receiver model. I'm not going to go through that.
Active listening skills.
All right, so active listening skills is another part of the communication process. Listening is paying attention to hear what the sender is saying. Good listeners have these skills in common. They show interest, they are alert, they maintain eye contact, they avoid interrupting, they pay attention, they avoid thinking ahead for a response, try to ignore personal prejudices, ignore distractions by moving to a quiet place, watch the speaker closely for nonverbal contradictions, and then maintain a positive attitude. Restatement, reflection, and clarification. Among other listening skills, active listening also involves reflection, restatement, and clarification. Restatement involves repeating the message to the sender in the receiver's own words. For example, a patient explains that she has a headache. The healthcare worker responds, "You say you have a headache." Restatement verifies that the correct message has been heard and understood. So they just restate what the patient said. Okay. Reflection involves responding with empathy. For example, a patient explains and shows the healthcare worker that he has a splinter in his palm. The healthcare worker responds sincerely, "Oh yes, I can see the splinter. They're really painful, aren't they?" So from this one, you need to know that reflection is an active listening technique that involves empathy. Reflection is an active listening technique that involves empathy. Okay. And then you have clarification occurs when the receiver asks questions to get more concise explanation or to clear up confusion about the message. For example, a child patient complains that her belly hurts. The healthcare worker responds, "Can you point on your belly exactly where it hurts?" So from this, you need to know that the active listening technique that involves asking questions to get a more concise explanation is clarification. So the active listening technique that involves asking questions to get a more concise explanation is clarification. All right, active listening involves reflection, restatement, and clarification. It's true. Which active listening technique involves empathy? That's reflection. Which active listening technique involves asking questions to get a more concise explanation? That's clarification. Repeating the message back to the sender in the receiver's own words. That's restating or restatement. Responded with empathy. That's reflection. Asking questions to get a more concise or clear explanation. That's clarification.
Other effective communication skills.
Not all communication skills involve listening. There are other skills that enhance communication. Be conscious of your own body language, including posture and eye contact. Avoid any display of anger. Speak slowly, softly, and clearly. Which of the following is a communication skill? It will be all of the above.
Lesson summary.
All right, so that was in the basic communication unit, the communication process lesson. We didn't go over that one in class. For some reason, I skipped over it. So you should be able to fill out some parts of your study guide. We've done interpersonal communication in class. I'm going to go over, I think, communication barriers, and then we'll do the other ones next week.
What you'll learn.
All right, so our objectives are to define communication barriers, describe the results of communication barriers, explain personal communication barriers, and identify ways to overcome barriers.
Communication barrier.
Not all communications fit neatly into a communication model. Instead, there are many things that can interfere with effective communication. A communication barrier can make it difficult for someone to send a clear message, understand the message being sent, or provide appropriate feedback. Communication barriers can be environmental and personal, and they can be caused by physical disability, psychological issues, and cultural diversity. So what you need to know, anything that interferes with effective communication is a communication barrier. So anything that can interfere with effective communication is called a communication barrier. In what way can a communication barrier interfere with effective communication? It will be all of the above. It'll make it difficult to send a message, make it difficult to understand the message, and make it difficult to provide feedback.
Personal communication barrier.
Recall that a communication barrier can make it difficult for someone to send a clear message, understand the message being sent, or provide appropriate feedback. Personal barriers can occur within either participant in communication. They can result from emotions and attitudes, resistance to change, preconceptions, and self-absorption. Additionally, personal barriers can form out of prejudice and personality, including traits such as closed-mindedness, judging, beliefs and stereotypes, and preaching or moralizing.
Emotions and attitudes.
Emotions and feelings can cause barriers. Extreme emotions, good and bad, can interfere with a person's ability to concentrate on a conversation. Personal attitudes can also create barriers. Prejudice toward groups based on race, ethnicity, religion, sex, age, financial status, and disabilities have absolutely no place in the healthcare industry. Healthcare workers must put aside all personal prejudice and treat patients and coworkers fairly and equally. Selective comprehension and selective memory can cause communication problems. Selective comprehension is when people only hear what they want to hear. They ignore all else. The result is that they fail to receive the whole message. Selective memory is when a person only recalls part of a message. Finally, an attitude of complacency or indifference can create barriers. In these cases, people may not act on a message if they do not care enough to do so. This can be dangerous if patients are complacent in taking medications or following prescribed healthcare procedures. Which of the following is an emotional attitude that can create a communication barrier? So it's all of them. Prejudice towards groups based on race, ethnicity, religion, sex, age, financial status, and disability should be tolerated. And that's false.
Preconceptions.
Preconceptions are similar to prejudice. Preconceptions are typically directed toward a single person rather than a group. Preconceptions create barriers when people disregard what another is saying simply because they disagree or they do not care for the other person. This closed-minded behavior can result in miscommunication. Healthcare workers must put aside all preconceptions when interacting with patients and coworkers. Resistance to change can create a communication barrier. Healthcare workers may have resistance themselves, or they may have to deal with a patient's resistance. Either way, it must be overcome. Some people cling to the established method of doing things. They may do so to the extent that they reject new ideas. Healthcare workers must be flexible and open minded towards changes and procedures that can improve healthcare for patients. Likewise, they must become skilled at communicating the benefit of change in a positive way to patients that reject new ideas. From this slide, you need to know clinging to the established method of doing things is known as resistance to change. So, clinging to the established method of doing things is known as resistance to change. With whom must healthcare workers overcome resistance to change? It's going to be all. Someone with preconceptions is open minded towards others and their ideas. It's false.
Self-absorption.
Self absorption can inhibit good communication. When people are preoccupied with their own problems, schedules, daydreaming, and other issues, they can miss much of the message coming from another person. Healthcare workers must put their own issues aside and focus 100% on their patients.
Overcoming
A healthcare worker who has these attitudes while communicating with patients is likely to alienate them. The result is that patients will attach little value to what the healthcare worker is saying. They may simply stop listening, and because healthcare workers have very important information to convey to patients, this situation must be avoided. Healthcare workers must overcome or put aside their personal prejudices and beliefs when working with patients. Each patient must be treated equally, yet as an individual with a unique personality. Healthcare workers can learn to overcome psychological communication barriers through observation. Observing how a coworker who is a skilled communicator handles a variety of situations can be invaluable. In some cases, patients may be the source of barriers out of fear, anxiety, or their own prejudices and attitudes. Healthcare workers must develop thick skin to keep negative patient attitudes from interfering with their work. Often, patient fear can be the true source of negativity. Healthcare workers should calmly and gently encourage patients to discuss their fears and feelings. Then, healthcare workers should do what they can to reassure and comfort them. When people are preoccupied with their own problems, schedules, daydreaming, and other issues, they can miss much of the message coming from another person. That's true. What can occur as a result of personal communication barriers? All of the above. Patient will become alienated. Patient will attach little value to what the healthcare worker is saying, and they may simply stop listening. I'm not sure if this is gonna play on here, but this is a scenario because usually the sound's not gonna pick up. But it's between Madeline and Jennifer. And Madeline says, "Good morning, Jennifer. Do you have a moment? I would like to discuss our new temperature policy with you." Jennifer says, "Okay, I guess. What's changing?" Madeline says, "Starting Monday, we're going to use tympanic thermometers exclusively on children ages 5 and up." Jennifer then says, "We're getting accurate results with the electronic thermometers now. Should we change?" Madeline responds, "Well, tympanic thermometers are much faster and they automatically eject the probe covers. Those are two features that an electronic thermometer doesn't have." And then Jennifer says, "Okay, but I really prefer the oil thermometers. I think they work better and are more accurate. I don't know why we should change something that is working for just fine." All right, so how did Jennifer react to a supervisor? She showed resistance to change. Um, what could Jennifer have done differently while communicating with her supervisor? She could have been more accommodating. And, if it's changing, it's changing. Turn it down. All right, so this is scenario 2. Same situation, but a different outcome. Madeline says, "Good morning, Jennifer. Do you have a moment? I would like to discuss our new temperature policy." Jennifer says, "Sure, what's changing?" Madeline says, "Starting Monday, we're going to use tympanic thermometers exclusively on children's ages 5 and up." Jennifer says, "Okay, let me write that down so I don't forget. Is there a problem with using the electronic thermometers that is causing the change?" Madeline says, "No, but the tympanic thermometers are much faster and can automatically eject the probe covers." Jennifer says, "Great, I'm willing to give them a try." So, scenario 2, Jennifer was willing to be flexible and accept change. That's true. How did her reaction in scenario 2 differ? She was willing to change, was willing to try the new procedure or the new way of doing things.
Lesson summary.
All right. We'll look at cultural barriers.
What you'll learn.
So we're going to define culture. Define cultural communication barriers.
Cultural communication barrier.
Recall that a communication barrier can make it difficult for someone to send a clear message, understand the message being sent, or provide appropriate feedback. Perhaps the most complicated communication barriers result from cultural differences. Culture includes values, beliefs, and customs that are common among a group of people. They are passed from one generation to the next. Cultural communication barriers include language, health practices, and beliefs, eye contact, and religion. Language may be the most obvious communication barrier. How can two people who speak different languages communicate? The patient has some English speaking ability. The healthcare worker can speak slowly and use simple words and gestures or pictures. If the patient has no English speaking ability, then the healthcare worker should find an interpreter if possible. In many cases, the patient may be accompanied by a family member that has some English speaking abilities. Even with an interpreter present, healthcare workers must be conscious to speak directly to the patient. Cultural communication barriers are simple to overcome. False. With an interpreter present, healthcare workers should speak directly to the interpreter. I don't need that one. False. It was false. Sorry.
Health beliefs.
Some cultures have beliefs about health practices and treatments that conflict with what the healthcare worker prescribes. In these cases, the healthcare worker must keep in mind that the patient has a right to refuse treatment. The patient may also supplement the prescribed treatment with their own culturally accepted methods. Healthcare workers should be sensitive to those cultural conflicts and work with patients to make sure that they are getting the required care and treatment.
Eye contact.
Eye contact is not a communication barrier in that it prevents communication from taking place. However, different cultural views on what is or is not appropriate eye contact can inhibit good communication. For example, in some cultures, direct eye contact is viewed as disrespectful. People of these cultures prefer to look down when speaking to someone. For a healthcare worker who feels that eye contact is an important part of communicating with patients, this can be frustrating, but they must respect and adjust to the patient's cultural differences. Some cultures have beliefs about health practices and treatments that conflict with what the healthcare worker prescribes. That's true. In some cultures, direct eye contact is viewed as disrespectful. That's true.
Religion.
Religion is an organized belief in a higher power. Religious beliefs can influence many aspects of people's lives, including birth, life, death, illness, and birth, life, diet, illness, and death. It is helpful for healthcare workers to be aware of some common religious influences so that they can effectively treat and interact with patients of various backgrounds. It is helpful for healthcare workers to be aware of some common religious influences so that they can effectively treat and interact with patients of various backgrounds. It's true.
Lesson summary.
All right, physical barriers.
What do you
So our objectives are to describe physical communication barriers, employ skills and techniques for overcoming physical barriers.
physical communicate?
Recall that a communication barrier can make it difficult for someone to send a clear message, understand the message being sent, or provide appropriate feedback. Patients who are physically or mentally impaired provide challenges when trying to communicate important health information. Some examples of physical challenges that can affect communication include problems with hearing, vision, and speech, other physical challenges, mental challenges, and current physical and mental state.
Hearing challenges.
Receiving messages can be challenging for people who are hearing impaired. Hearing challenges range from deafness to hard of hearing. When communicating with deaf patients, healthcare workers who know sign language have an advantage. They will be able to communicate with a deaf person with ease. However, for the many healthcare workers who do not know how to sign, they must compensate in some way to overcome this barrier. They must utilize body language and gestures to help emphasize their words. Additionally, they must speak clearly using brief sentences. Many hearing impaired people are skilled at lip reading, and so healthcare workers must be sure to face the patient when speaking. For patients who are hard of hearing, healthcare workers should be sure to face them when speaking, speak clearly at a moderate pace, and keep sentences short and uncomplicated. Healthcare workers should also tactfully ask for feedback to make sure the patient understands the message. Healthcare workers are not able to communicate effectively using these tips, then they should write important messages on paper so that they are sure that the patient receives the message. Which of the following is a method that healthcare workers and patients can use to overcome a hearing challenge? And it's all of them.
Vision challenges.
Vision challenges range from blindness to low vision. Both cases may result in communication challenges. People who are blind can hear the message, but that is all. They cannot see the healthcare workers' body language, gestures, or facial expressions. Healthcare workers must be sensitive to this barrier by speaking softly, announcing their presence, describing procedures as they are happening, and explaining unusual noises. Healthcare workers may also find it effective to use touch or great sensitivity when dealing with vision impaired patients. For patients who have low vision, the healthcare worker must be tactful in determining what the patient can and cannot do. If the patient appears to have some trouble seeing, ask if you can turn on more lights. If it appears that the patient is not reading small gestures and body language, use them more grandly.
Speech challenges.
Challenges with speech can include aphasia or dysarthria. In either case, the patient is likely able to receive messages without problem. However, they may have multiple challenges with sending messages. Patients with aphasia have speech problems that originate with damage to the brain from tumors, strokes, or diseases. They may struggle both with speaking and with writing. When communicating with an aphasia patient, it is critical that healthcare workers exhibit patience. They should speak in a normal tone of voice and use simple language and phrases. They should be aware that the patient may not understand what they are saying. Healthcare workers should also show consideration by asking questions that will require brief answers and to restate the patient's answers to be certain that they have received the correct information. Patients with dysarthria have trouble with particular sounds and words or may slur words. It is often caused by some form of influence on the body, such as medication or alcohol. It can also be caused by facial or tongue weakness. Healthcare workers should encourage these patients to speak slowly and to use hand gestures. They should allow patients plenty of time to express themselves. don't think none of this is
physically or mentally
going to
challenged.
be on your
Current physical or mental.
test, to be honest. Let's skip all that. I'm trying to think. Environmental.
What you'll learn.
I don't think none of those are going to be on there either. Let's see.
Environmental noise and activity levels. Physical arrangement and comfort. Time. Lesson summary.
I did skip something though. Was it on this one?
What you'll learn. Communication barriers. Personal communication barriers. Emotions and attitudes. Preconceptions. Resistance to change. Preconceptions. Resistance to self-absorbed. Overcoming personal and psychological communication barriers.
I thought.
Lesson
I guess
summary.
it wasn't on this one. I thought I was missing something. Anyway. So the rest of these physical and environmental was nothing on the test. So we'll do communicating with patients and documentation and communication technology next week. So if you need to stop the lesson, whatever, just make sure you're doing that. What I did tell you to write down. So you have 2 different videos to watch. And if you were absent on Wednesday, then your study guide should be in the absent work bin with your name already on it. You can grab a copy. It's also on Schoology, so if you want to do it online, you can. Okay.